Julian Vance stood by the glass walls of his penthouse, watching the city lights blur in the rain. He had exactly 30 days. The will left by his late grandfather was clear and utterly bizarre. Julian had to marry within a month and stay married for a year, or the entire controlling stake of Vance Global would fall into the hands of his bitter, reckless brother Silas. Julian despised the idea of love, but he loved his empire. He needed a wife, someone quiet, someone who would sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, take the money and leave him in peace. He instructed his lawyers to place a highly discreet, heavily vetted advertisement for a high-paying companionship contract. Hundreds applied, but one application caught his eye, not because of the qualifications, but because of the sheer audacity of the cover letter. It simply read that the applicant was tired of pouring coffee for entitled rich men, but if the pay was good enough, she could pretend to tolerate one. Intrigued and slightly offended, Julian arranged the interview at his private club. That was how he met Nora Thorne. She was a barista at a high-end cafe he occasionally frequented, though he had never truly looked at her before. She sat across from him in the dimly lit club, wearing a simple but pristine coat, her posture perfect. When Julian slid the massive contract across the table, outlining his demands for absolute compliance and public affection, Nora did not reach for a pen. She pushed it back. She told him his terms were draconian, and that she would only agree if she retained her independence, her own schedule, and the right to tell him when he was being insufferable. Julian, unaccustomed to the word no, found himself leaning closer. He agreed. The wedding took place a week later in a cold, quiet judge's chamber. There were no flowers, no music, only the scratching of pens on legal documents. When Julian offered her a diamond ring that cost more than most houses, Nora shook her head. She pulled a simple, thin silver band from her pocket and slipped it on her own finger, stating she did not need a heavy stone to weigh down her hand. In the corner of the room, Silas Vance watched with a sneer. He approached them after the judge left, his voice dripping with venom. Silas told Nora she was nothing but a temporary charity case, a cheap gold digger who would be broken and discarded by the time winter arrived. Nora did not flinch. She merely looked at Silas and told him that cheap things break easily, but she was entirely unbreakable. Life in the penthouse was a strange dance of forced proximity and stubborn pride. Julian expected Nora to spend his money, to redecorate, to host lavish parties. Instead, she continued going to her cafe job, waking up at dawn, and completely ignoring the army of staff Julian employed. Tension simmered between them. When Julian tried to buy her a new wardrobe for a corporate dinner, she left the boxes untouched and wore a vintage dress she had found herself. At the dinner, Silas tried to humiliate her, asking complex questions about international trade and mocking her humble background. To Julian's absolute shock, Nora engaged. She discussed foreign markets with terrifying precision, even correcting Silas's French in front of the board of directors. Julian watched her mesmerized. The fake affection they were supposed to portray began to feel dangerously real. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. Julian came home burning with a severe fever, completely exhausted from a grueling board meeting. He tried to lock himself in his office, barking at the staff to leave him alone. Nora dismissed the staff. She made a simple, warm broth, walked into his office, and took the files from his hands. She placed a cold towel on his forehead. For the first time in his life, Julian let someone take care of him. In the quiet darkness of the room, he realized he was falling for the woman he had hired. But secrets never stay buried in the world of the ultra-wealthy. Julian's private investigator, originally hired to do a routine background check, delivered a startling dossier. Julian sat in his office staring at the photographs and documents. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. He called Nora into the room and threw the file on the desk. He demanded to know why the simple barista he married was actually Eleanora Thorne, the sole missing heiress to the massive Thorne maritime empire. Nora looked at the papers, her shoulders dropping. She did not cry. She looked him straight in the eye and confessed everything. Her family's empire had been built on corruption, ruined by scandal, and stained with the tears of ruined employees. Unable to bear the guilt of her family's name, she had walked away from billions, changed her identity, and chosen a life of quiet humility to pay off the debts her father had secretly left behind. She had taken Julian's contract not for greed, but to finally clear the last of the hidden debts and free herself completely. Julian felt a profound sense of betrayal. He hated being kept in the dark. His pride took over, and a cold silence fell over the penthouse. For weeks they lived like ghosts passing in the halls. They spoke only when necessary, but Julian could not maintain his anger. He found himself missing the way she challenged him. He started leaving small peace offerings, not diamonds, but her favorite obscure roast of coffee on the kitchen counter, or a rare book she had mentioned in passing. It was his silent, proud way of apologizing. Before they could fully mend the bridge between them, Silas struck. Having done his own digging, Silas discovered Nora's true identity and the scandalous history of Thorn Maritime. The annual Vance Global Charity Gala was the perfect stage for his revenge. The ballroom was packed with the city's elite. Silas took the stage, holding a microphone and a thick folder, ready to expose Nora's family crimes to the press, aiming to trigger the morality clause in Julian's contract and steal the company. Julian stepped forward to protect her, but Nora gently pushed past him. She walked up the steps to the stage, took the microphone from a stunned Silas, and addressed the crowd herself. She owned her name. She owned her past. She told the room exactly who she was and what her father had done. Then she pulled out a flash drive. She revealed that during her time at Vance Global, she had recognized the same patterns of corruption she had seen in her father's company. She had found the paper trail of Silas, embezzling millions from Vance Global to fund his own private ventures. The room erupted in gasps. Silas turned pale, stammering and backing away as security approached the stage. Investors immediately pulled out their phones, abandoning him on the spot. Silas was utterly humiliated, escorted out of his own gala as a disgraced thief. Later that night, the penthouse was quiet again. Julian stood by the glass walls, looking out at the city, but this time Nora was standing beside him. He turned to her, stripping away his arrogance. He apologized for his pride and asked for her forgiveness. He told her he did not care about the Thorn legacy or the contract. He only cared about the fierce, brilliant woman who refused to let him win an argument. Nora smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and finally admitted she loved him too. A year later, the bizarre contract was a thing of the past. They had signed a real marriage license on their own terms. Julian and Nora stood in a newly renovated office building overlooking the docks. They were not just husband and wife, they were partners. With Julian's backing, Nora had reclaimed Thorn Maritime, rebuilding it from the ground up as a clean, ethical subsidiary of Vance Global. The shadows of their pasts were gone, replaced by a future they were building together. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story today. Subscribe to the channel to follow along with our next stories. We will see you next time. Damien Sterling built his reputation as a ruthless acquirer of companies and a serial breaker of hearts. But his latest corporate conquest, a multi-billion-dollar merger, was on the verge of collapse. The conservative board of the target company refused to hand their legacy over to a man whose face was plastered across the tabloids every weekend with a different supermodel. Damien needed an immediate image overhaul. He needed to appear grounded, responsible, and ready to settle down. His public relations team suggested a temporary, highly publicized engagement to someone ordinary, someone completely detached from his world of elite excess. Finding the perfect candidate proved difficult until Damien walked through the grand lobby of Sterling Capital late one evening. He stopped when he heard a quiet but firm voice echoing near the reception desk. Camilla Stone, a receptionist who had worked in the building for 3 years, was calmly but ruthlessly dismantling the ego of a senior vice president who had spoken down to her. Damien watched from the shadows, fascinated by the fire in her eyes and the way she refused to back down. The next morning, Camilla was summoned to the top floor. Damien offered her a sum of money that would change her life, provided she agreed to play the role of his devoted, modest fiancé for 6 months. Camilla read the contract carefully. She knew the reputation of the man sitting across from her. She needed the money desperately, far more than Damien could possibly guess, but she refused to be treated like a purchased commodity. She looked Damien in the eye and agreed to the deal, but strictly on her own terms. She would not quit her job, she would not change her personality to suit his PR team, and she would absolutely not let him speak to her the way he spoke to his employees. Damien, amused and slightly captivated by her defiance, signed his name next to hers. Their first public appearance was a disaster of clashing wills. Damien tried to drape a heavy, ostentatious diamond necklace around Camilla's neck before a press dinner. Camilla took it off and handed it back to him, telling him that she was supposed to look like a woman in love, not a chandelier. She wore a simple, elegant pearl pendant instead. Across the ballroom, Delphine Cross, Damien's manipulative ex-fiancée, and the daughter of a rival CEO watched them with narrowed eyes. Delphine had always planned to win Damien back when it was politically convenient, and she instantly recognized that Camilla did not belong in their world. The forced proximity began to chip away at their defenses. During a grueling cross-country press tour, Damien suffered a sudden, severe panic attack in his hotel suite, the weight of his empire finally crushing his chest. Instead of calling for help or panicking, Camilla sat on the floor beside him. She held his hand, speaking in a soft, steady rhythm until his breathing returned to normal. She did not judge him. She did not ask questions. She just poured him a glass of water and stayed by his side until morning. In that quiet room, the billionaire realized the receptionist possessed more strength than anyone he had ever met. But Camilla was hiding a secret that terrified her. She was not just working to survive, she was protecting her 5-year-old son, Leo. Her previous relationship had been a nightmare, leaving her with crippling debts and a fierce desire to shield her child from the public eye. She had hidden Leo's existence from Damien, terrified that the ruthless businessman would see a child as a breach of contract or a PR liability. The secret did not stay hidden. Delphine Cross had hired a private investigator the night of the press dinner. On the morning of Damien's most crucial shareholder meeting, a prominent tabloid published a front-page story featuring a blurry photograph of Camilla dropping a little boy off at a modest daycare. The headline accused Damien's new fiancée of living a double life. When Damien confronted her in his office, the air was thick with tension. Camilla stood tall, her voice trembling, but unbroken, as she explained that she would never apologize for protecting her son. She expected Damien to tear up the contract and throw her to the wolves. Instead, a cold, unreadable silence fell over him. He dismissed her for the week, telling her to stay in his secondary townhouse away from the cameras. Camilla assumed it was the end. She packed her bags, her heart breaking in a way she had not anticipated, realizing she had fallen in love with a man who could only see her as a business deal. What she did not know was that Damien was not punishing her. He was quietly going to war. Behind the scenes, Damien arranged a permanent ironclad security detail for Leo's daycare. He set up an anonymous trust fund to ensure the boy's future was untouchable. He realized that his anger was not about the secret itself, but about the fact that Camilla had not trusted him enough to ask for his help. Delphine, frustrated that her leaked photo had not immediately destroyed the engagement, planned her final strike for the Grand Sterling Charity Ball. As Damien and Camilla stood together in the center of the room, playing their parts for the cameras, Delphine took the stage. She grabbed the microphone, intending to publicly reveal the identity of Leo's father, a convicted fraudster, to humiliate Camilla and crash Damien's pending merger once and for all. Before Delphine could speak her first venomous word, Damien stepped in front of Camilla, shielding her from the crowd. He signaled the sound engineer in the back of the room. Instead of Delphine's voice, the ballroom speakers suddenly blasted a crystal-clear audio recording. It was Delphine caught on tape a week prior, explicitly bribing a tabloid journalist to fabricate evidence against Camilla and threatening to ruin the Sterling merger for her own family's gain. The ballroom fell dead silent, followed by an eruption of furious whispers. Delphine dropped the microphone, her face pale with horror. The high society that she worshipped instantly turned their backs on her. Security escorted a sobbing, humiliated Delphine out of the building as the cameras flashed. Damien turned away from the crowd and looked only at Camilla. Right there, in front of the flashing cameras and staring investors, he dropped all pretense. He told her that he was done pretending, done with the merger and done with the hollow life he had built. He asked her to forgive his coldness, and promised that he would spend the rest of his life protecting her and Leo, not as a contract, but as a father and a husband. Camilla looked into his eyes, seeing the absolute sincerity in his gaze, and finally let her guard down, pulling him into a kiss that no PR team could ever script. Months later, the glittering skyline of the city was far behind them. Damien had stepped down as the CEO of Sterling Capital, taking a quiet seat on the board instead. He and Camilla walked along the sandy beach of a quiet coastal town, watching little Leo run ahead of them near the waves. They had traded a world of cold luxury for a life of genuine warmth, leaving the empire behind to build a home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story today. Subscribe to the channel to follow along with our next stories. We will see you next time. Elliot Graves, the relentless chief executive of Graves Global, sat in the private lounge of his own high-stakes casino. His longtime business partner, Marcus Devereaux, swirled a glass of expensive whiskey and proposed a sickening wager. Marcus offered his 10% voting shares in the company against Elliot's prized private island. The terms were simple and cruel. Elliot had to find a woman completely outside their elite wealthy circle, date her, and bring her to the annual shareholder gala in 3 weeks as his genuine fiancée. Driven by his obsessive need to consolidate power and eliminate Marcus's toxic influence over the board, Elliot blindly accepted the bet. Instead of hiring a professional actress, Elliot downloaded an anonymous dating application, creating a minimalist profile with a generic name and a picture of a regular dog. He matched with Sienna Hayes. Sienna was a talented landscape architect who spent her days working in city parks with her hands in the dirt. When they finally met for coffee, Elliot wore a plain jacket to hide his wealth. Sienna laughed at his rigid posture, teasing him for looking like a corporate drone. She was vibrant, completely unafraid, and utterly oblivious to the fact that she was speaking to the most ruthless billionaire in the financial district. Elliot found himself genuinely captivated by her lack of pretense and the easy warmth of her smile. The deception deepened rapidly. Elliot invented a story about being a mid-level financial analyst to explain his long hours and stressful phone calls. As they spent more time together, the cruel lines of the bet began to blur. He invited her to a high-end charity dinner, claiming he received the tickets from a grateful boss. Sienna arrived in a simple borrowed dress, completely unbothered by the sea of custom designer gowns around them. When Marcus spotted them across the room, he gave Elliot a knowing, sinister smirk. Sienna did not shrink under the glaring lights or the judgment of the room. Instead, she charmed the abrasive investors with her sharp wit and authentic conversation. Small cracks began to appear in Elliot's icy armor. One evening, after a long walk in the rain, Sienna brought him back to her tiny, drafty apartment. She made him cheap instant noodles, laughing as he struggled to eat them gracefully. Elliot realized with a heavy heart that he felt more at peace in her cramped kitchen than in his massive empty penthouse. When he tried to secretly upgrade her ancient heating system by paying her landlord, she found out and confronted him, furiously defending her independence. She told him firmly that she did not need a savior with a checkbook, she just wanted an honest partner. The guilt of his secret bet began to choke him. The truth of Sienna's past surfaced during a quiet, vulnerable conversation on her fire escape. She confessed why she lived so frugally despite her immense talent. 3 years ago, her family had been decimated by a predatory investment scheme. They lost their home, their savings, and her father's health declined from the stress. As she described the fraudulent shell company that destroyed them, Elliot's blood ran cold. He recognized the name of the firm instantly. It was a defunct subsidiary that Marcus Devereaux had managed just before joining Graves Global. Before Elliot could confess his true identity and the horrific origins of their relationship, Marcus orchestrated his master stroke. The day before the gala, an anonymous package arrived at Sienna's apartment. It contained photographs of the casino lounge, audio transcripts of the bet, and a detailed financial profile of Elliot Graves, the billionaire she thought was just an analyst. Sienna did not scream or throw things. She walked straight into the towering lobby of Graves Global, bypassed the stunned security guards, and placed the file on Elliot's massive mahogany desk. She looked at him with a quiet, devastating disappointment, telling him that he was no different from the men who had ruined her family. Then she walked out without looking back. The silence of his penthouse became unbearable. Elliot tried to send flowers and waited outside her apartment, but she ignored him entirely. Seizing the opportunity, Marcus moved in for the kill. Confident that Elliot was spiraling in distraction, Marcus called an emergency board meeting to trigger a hostile takeover, using Elliot's erratic absence as proof of instability. Worse, Marcus sent a legal threat to Sienna, promising to bury her small landscaping firm if she ever spoke about the old investment scheme. Elliot walked into the boardroom with a cold, terrifying calm. Marcus was mid-speech, gloating about the future of the company. Elliot did not shout. He simply connected his tablet to the main projector. The screen lit up not with financial projections, but with meticulously gathered banking records. Elliot had spent the last week tearing apart Marcus's history. He displayed the exact paper trail proving Marcus had embezzled millions from their clients through the same shell company that ruined Sienna's family. The board erupted in chaos. Marcus tried to run for the door, his face pale and sweating, but the police were already waiting in the hallway. Marcus was escorted out in handcuffs, his reputation and freedom destroyed in a matter of minutes. Elliot found Sienna exactly where they had first met, sitting on a bench in the small city park. He did not arrive in his armored limousine. He walked in the rain. He stood before her, entirely stripped of his corporate arrogance. He did not offer her money or hollow promises. He handed her a thick legal folder containing the full restitution of her family's stolen funds, legally extracted from Marcus's frozen assets. Then he offered a genuine, vulnerable apology. He told her he had started as a man playing a cruel game, but he had ended up a man who could not imagine his life without her honest, beautiful soul. Sienna looked at the documents, then at the man standing shivering in the cold, and finally softly reached out to take his hand. 2 years later, the ruthless corporate world of Graves Global was a distant thought on the weekends. Sienna stood in the center of a massive, thriving botanical nursery, the headquarters of her own rapidly expanding landscape architecture firm. Elliot stood by the wooden counter, awkwardly but happily ringing up a customer. He had kept his empire, but he had learned where his true wealth resided. They had built a partnership based on absolute truth, growing a life together from the ground up, stronger and more deeply rooted than any skyscraper in the city. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story today. Subscribe to the channel to follow along with our next stories. We will see you next time.